You've spent 18 months planning the perfect wedding reception. Every detail meticulously chosen, every vendor carefully selected, every penny saved and spent with purpose. Then, 48 hours before your big day, your phone rings. The venue manager's voice is shaking as they deliver news that will shatter everything you believed about trust, loyalty, and the people you thought you could count on. But here's what they didn't expect. This betrayal would become the catalyst for something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. This is Hannah Johnson's story, and it's about to change everything you think you know about turning your worst moment into your greatest triumph.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hannah Johnson stood in her cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon, surrounded by wedding magazines, color swatches, and vendor contracts spread across every available surface. At 26, she had always been the type of person who planned everything down to the smallest detail. Her friends often joked that she could organize a military operation with the same precision she brought to planning her weekend brunches. The apartment reflected her personality, everything in its place, labeled storage boxes stacked neatly in corners, and a massive wall calendar marking every wedding-related milestone in different colored pens. Red for vendor meetings, blue for dress fittings, green for venue walkthroughs, and purple for the countdown to the big day, October 15th, just 49 days away. Hannah worked as a marketing coordinator for a sustainable fashion startup, a job that barely paid the bills but aligned with her values. She and her fiancé, Marcus Thompson, had been together since their senior year at Portland State University. Marcus, a software developer with a steady income and an easygoing personality, was the perfect complement to Hannah's intensity. Where she worried about every detail, he trusted that everything would work out fine. Their love story wasn't the stuff of romantic comedies, no dramatic meet-cutes or whirlwind romance. Instead, it was built on shared Netflix passwords, late-night study sessions, and a mutual understanding that they wanted to build something real together. Marcus proposed on a rainy Tuesday evening in their favorite coffee shop, not because it was romantic, but because it was authentically them. The wedding planning had consumed Hannah's life for the past year and a half. While her friends opted for expensive venues and elaborate celebrations, Hannah and Marcus chose Riverside Gardens, a charming venue in Beaverton that specialized in intimate gatherings. The venue featured exposed brick walls, string lights, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a small garden where they planned to take photos during golden hour. What made Riverside Gardens special wasn't just its rustic charm, it was the story behind it. The venue was owned by Margaret Sinclair, a 60-something woman who had converted her family's old warehouse into an event space after losing her husband to cancer. Margaret understood that weddings weren't just parties, they were the beginning of families, the celebration of dreams made real. She personally met with every couple, learned their story, and helped them create celebrations that reflected their unique love. Hannah had fallen in love with Margaret almost as much as the venue itself. During their first meeting, Margaret had listened intently as Hannah described their vision, something elegant but not pretentious, memorable but not over the top, meaningful but not overly sentimental. Margaret had nodded knowingly and said, "Honey, I can see exactly what you're dreaming of, and we're going to make it perfect." The planning process had been a journey of 1,000 small decisions. Hannah had spent countless evenings researching vendors, reading reviews, and comparing prices. Every choice represented a compromise between their vision and their budget of $25,000, a sum that had required Hannah to work overtime, Marcus to take on freelance projects, and both of them to forgo vacations and nice dinners out for over a year. She had found their photographer, David Chen, through Instagram after falling in love with his candid documentary-style approach. Their caterer, Rosa Martinez, ran a small family business that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine using ingredients from local Oregon producers. The florist was Jennifer Walsh, a recent graduate from the Pacific Northwest College of Art who created arrangements that looked like they had been gathered from a wild meadow. Each vendor had been chosen, not just for their work, but for their story.
Hannah believed that surrounding themselves with people who genuinely cared about their craft would create an energy that guests would feel, even if they couldn't articulate why.
Marcus's involvement in the planning had been supportive but minimal. He cared deeply about the marriage, but was content to let Hannah lead on the wedding details. His main contributions were taste testing the caterer's samples, a job he took very seriously, helping address invitations, and occasionally talking Hannah down from minor panic attacks when vendors didn't respond to emails quickly enough. The guest list had been another exercise in careful curation. With space for only 80 people, every invitation represented a deliberate choice. Hannah's parents, divorced but committed to being civil for the wedding, would both attend with their respective partners. Marcus's large, extended family from California meant tough decisions about which cousins to include. College friends, work colleagues, and family friends all had to be weighed and balanced. As September rolled into early October, Hannah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that comes with any major life event. The to-do list was getting shorter, but each remaining item felt monumentally important. Final dress fitting? Scheduled. Marriage license? Obtained. Vendor confirmations? Sent and received. Rehearsal dinner reservations? Confirmed. Hannah had created detailed timelines for everyone involved. The wedding party knew exactly when to arrive for hair and makeup. The vendors had minute-by-minute schedules for setup and breakdown. Even the playlist for the reception had been organized into segments: cocktail hour, dinner, dancing, and late-night celebration. But underneath all the planning and preparation, Hannah was experiencing something she hadn't expected, a growing sense that this wedding was about more than just one day. The process had revealed things about herself she hadn't known before. She discovered she was more decisive than she had realized, more creative than she had given herself credit for, and more capable of managing complex projects than her job had ever allowed her to demonstrate. The wedding planning had also deepened her relationship with Marcus in unexpected ways. Watching him support her vision while contributing his own ideas had shown her new dimensions of his character. She saw how he handled stress, how he communicated with vendors, how he navigated family politics, and how he prioritized their relationship above all the wedding chaos. 2 weeks before the wedding, Hannah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Every detail was falling into place exactly as she had envisioned. The menu was finalized, the seating chart perfectly balanced, the flowers ordered, and the music playlist complete. She had backup plans for rain, contingencies for vendor delays, and emergency kits packed for any minor crises. Margaret had called the previous week to confirm all the final details. They had walked through the timeline together, discussed the setup requirements, and reviewed the floor plan one final time. Margaret had seemed her usual warm professional self, praising Hannah's organization and expressing excitement about bringing their vision to life. "You've planned a beautiful celebration," Margaret had said. "I can tell how much love has gone into every detail. Your guests are going to have such a special evening." Hannah had hung up from that call feeling validated and confident. All the stress, all the late nights, all the careful budgeting and decision-making had led to this moment. In just 2 weeks, she and Marcus would be married, surrounded by everyone they loved, in a space that felt perfectly suited to their story. She had no way of knowing that Margaret Sinclair was at that very moment having a very different conversation with someone else, a conversation that would shatter everything Hannah had built and believed about trust, fairness, and the people we choose to support our most important moments. The betrayal was already in motion, the replacement was already being planned, and Hannah's perfect wedding was about to become the catalyst for something she never could have imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 48 hours before the wedding, when Hannah's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She was sitting at her kitchen table, putting finishing touches on the welcome bags for out-of-town guests, small canvas totes filled with local Portland treats, custom map of their favorite city spots, and handwritten notes thanking each guest for traveling to celebrate with them. Marcus was in the living room, assembling the wooden welcome sign his brother had crafted for them, occasionally calling out questions about which screws went where. The apartment smelled like the lavender sachets Hannah had been making as wedding favors, and soft jazz played from her Bluetooth speaker. It was one of those perfect domestic moments that felt like a preview of their married life. "Hello, this is Hannah," she answered, expecting it to be a vendor with a last-minute question. "Hannah, hi, this is Margaret Sinclair from Riverside Gardens." Margaret's voice sounded different, strained, almost breathless. I need to talk to you about something very important." Hannah's hand instinctively tightened around the phone. In all their interactions over the past year and a half, Margaret had never sounded like this. "Of course, Margaret, what's going on?" There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of Margaret's heavy breathing. "Hannah, I don't know how to tell you this, and I am so sorry, but I need to cancel your wedding reception." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. She actually looked at her phone to make sure she was still connected to the right call. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Your reception on Saturday. I have to cancel it. Something has come up, and I can't host your event." Hannah stood up so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Marcus looked up from his project, concern immediately crossing his face. "Margaret, I don't understand. We have a contract. We've paid our deposits. The wedding isn't 2 days. You can't just cancel." I know, and I will refund everything, of course. I'm so sorry, Hannah. This has never happened before in 20 years of business, but there's been a family emergency, and I just can't. What kind of family emergency requires you to shut down the entire venue? Hannah's voice was rising, and she saw Marcus setting down his tools and walking toward her. Can't someone else manage the event? We could help coordinate. No, that's not possible. The whole venue needs to be closed. I'm calling all events this week. Something in Margaret's tone didn't ring true. Hannah had spent months getting to know this woman, listening to her stories about other couples, watching her genuine excitement for each celebration. This stilted, rehearsed-sounding explanation felt completely wrong. "Margaret, level with me. What's really going on?" Another long pause, then Margaret's voice cracked. "Hannah, God, this is so hard. There's another couple, the Andersons. They're offering me 3 times what you're paying, and they need the space for Saturday night. It's their only available date because the groom is being deployed overseas next week." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Hannah felt her knees go weak, and Marcus rushed to steady her, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "You're canceling our wedding for more money?" Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not just about the money," Margaret said quickly. "It's a military family. The groom is going to Afghanistan. This might be their only chance for years to have all their family together. How could I say no to that?" "How could you say no to us?" Hannah shot back, her voice gaining strength from her rage. "We trusted you. We chose you because we thought you cared about couples and their stories. We're not just a booking, Margaret. This is our life." "I know, and I'm so sorry. I've been sick about this for days, but the Andersons are desperate and you're young. You can reschedule. You have your whole lives ahead of you." Hannah stared at her phone in disbelief. "Reschedule? Our families have already traveled here. I have 80 guests coming from all over the country. My grandmother is 92 years old, and this might be the last wedding she's able to attend. We've booked vendors, ordered flowers, planned everything around Saturday night. I'll help you find another venue. I have contacts all over Portland. And like I said, I'll refund every penny you've paid me, plus I'll cover any costs you can't recover from other vendors." "It's not about the money," Hannah exploded. "It's about trust. It's about keeping your word. It's about the fact that you made us believe you were different from every other vendor who just sees dollar signs."
Margaret was crying now. Hannah could hear it in her voice. "You're right. You're absolutely right, and I hate myself for this. But Hannah, they're offering $75,000 for one night. That would save my business. We've been struggling since the pandemic, and this one event would cover 6 months of overhead." Hannah felt something shift inside her chest. The betrayal was complete now, laid bare in all its ugly simplicity. This wasn't about military families or emergency situations. This was about greed, plain and simple. Margaret had found a better offer and was willing to destroy Hannah's wedding to take it. "Who are the Andersons?" Hannah asked, her voice deadly calm now. "I can't give you their personal information. Who are the Andersons?" Margaret sighed.
Victoria Anderson. She's the daughter of Richard Anderson, the real estate developer. You might have seen him in the news. Anderson Development Group. They're building those luxury condos downtown. Hannah knew exactly who Richard Anderson was. His company had been in the local papers for months, pushing through controversial developments that displaced longtime residents. His daughter's wedding wasn't about military service, it was about money and influence, exactly the kind of entitled behavior that made Hannah's blood boil. "So let me understand this," Hannah said, pacing now while Marcus watched helplessly. "Richard Anderson's daughter gets whatever she wants because Daddy has deep pockets, and the little people like Marcus and me get trampled because we can't compete?" "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that. You found someone who could pay more, so you're breaking your contract with us. Don't dress it up as nobility, Margaret. Own what you're doing." There was silence on the other end of the line. Margaret finally spoke, her voice small and defeated. "You're right. I'm not proud of this, Hannah, but I'm desperate. If I don't take this booking, I might lose the venue entirely." Hannah stopped pacing. An idea was forming in her mind. Dangerous, probably stupid, but satisfying in a way that felt necessary. "Margaret, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Are you recording this call?" "What? No, of course not." "Good, because I want you to understand something. You think you're making a smart business decision, but you're about to learn that some things are more valuable than money. You're about to regret breaking this contract in ways you can't even imagine yet." "Hannah, please, don't make this harder than it already is. I feel terrible, but it's done. The decision is made." "Oh, the decision is definitely made," Hannah said, her voice gaining a steel edge that surprised even her. "But not the way you think. See, the thing about betrayal is that it shows people exactly who they're dealing with. And you just showed me exactly who you are." "I don't understand." "You will. Marcus and I are going to have our wedding reception on Saturday night. Maybe not at your venue, but we're going to celebrate our marriage surrounded by people who actually keep their word. And Margaret, after Saturday night, everyone in Portland is going to know exactly what kind of business you run." Hannah hung up before Margaret could respond. She stood in her kitchen, phone clutched in her hand, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. Marcus approached carefully, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. "Hannah, what just happened?" She turned to look at him, and he stepped back at the intensity in her eyes. Margaret Sinclair just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thinks she can cancel our wedding for a better offer. She thinks we're just going to disappear quietly and let her get away with this. "Baby, I know you're upset, but maybe we should—" "No." Hannah's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We're not rescheduling. We're not finding another venue. We're not letting some rich developer's daughter steal our wedding day because Mommy and Daddy have more money than us." Marcus looked around at the wedding favors, the welcome bags, the assembled signs and decorations that filled their small apartment. "But Hannah, if we don't have a venue—" Hannah smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "We're going to have a reception, Marcus, and it's going to be better than anything Margaret Sinclair could have provided. But first, we're going to make sure the whole world knows exactly what she did to us." She picked up her laptop and opened it with a snap. "Margaret wants to play hardball? Fine! But she just picked a fight with the wrong marketing coordinator." Marcus watched his fiancée transform before his eyes, her heartbreak crystallizing into something far more powerful and dangerous: determination. Whatever was about to happen, he realized Margaret Sinclair had no idea what she just unleashed. Hannah's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard with a fury that Marcus had never seen before. It was 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night, less than 46 hours before their scheduled ceremony, and she had been researching and planning for 3 straight hours since Margaret's devastating phone call. "Hannah, you need to sleep,"
Marcus said gently, setting a cup of chamomile tea beside her laptop. "We can figure this out in the morning." She looked up at him with eyes that were red-rimmed but blazing with purpose. "Sleep? Marcus, we don't have time to sleep. Do you know what I've discovered in the last 3 hours?" Marcus pulled up a chair beside her, noting the dozens of browser tabs open on her screen and the legal pad covered in her precise handwriting. "Tell me." "Margaret Sinclair has done this before." Hannah turned her laptop screen toward him, showing a Reddit thread from 8 months ago. "Look at this post in the Portland wedding forums. A couple named the Washingtons had their reception canceled 2 weeks before their wedding. Margaret claimed it was a family emergency, but look at the comments." Marcus squinted at the screen, reading the responses from other brides. One comment in particular caught his attention. "Same thing happened to my cousin last year. Margaret canceled for a plumbing issue, but then my friends saw photos of another wedding at Riverside Gardens that same night." "She's been doing this systematically," Hannah continued, clicking to another tab. "I found 3 more instances in the past 2 years, always with less than 30 days notice, always with some noble-sounding excuse, always mysteriously getting a better booking for the same date." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Have any of them taken legal action? "That's the genius of her operation," Hannah said bitterly. "She refunds the deposit and offers to cover reasonable additional costs. Most couples are so panicked about finding a last-minute replacement that they take the refund and run. By the time they realize what really happened, they're married and moved on with their lives." Hannah pulled up another document on her screen, a detailed spreadsheet she'd been creating. "But I'm not most couples, Marcus. Look what I've compiled." The spreadsheet was impressive and terrifying in its thoroughness. Hannah had tracked Margaret's social media posts, cross-referenced them with wedding vendor Instagram accounts, and identified at least 6 instances where Riverside Gardens had hosted events on dates when other couples had been canceled. "Hannah, this is incredible detective work, but what are we going to do with it?" She smiled that dangerous smile again. "We're going to make sure Margaret Sinclair never ruins another couple's wedding day. But first, we're going to save our own." Hannah clicked to a new tab showing a Google Doc titled Operation Wedding Recovery 48-Hour Plan. Marcus marveled at his fiancée's ability to organize even her revenge plots with military precision. "I've been making calls," Hannah said, scrolling through her detailed action plan. "David Chen, our photographer, is still available and committed to shooting our wedding. Rosa Martinez says she can pivot the catering to a different location with 12 hours notice. Jennifer Walsh already created our floral arrangements. They just need to be delivered somewhere." "But where?" Marcus asked. "Every decent venue in Portland is booked months in advance." Hannah's eyes gleamed. "That's where you're wrong. I called my mom." Marcus raised his eyebrows. Hannah's relationship with her mother, Patricia Johnson, was complicated. Patricia was a successful real estate agent who had always been critical of Hannah's choices: her modest apartment, her nonprofit job, her decision to have a small wedding instead of the elaborate affair Patricia thought she deserved. "Your mom? Hannah, you haven't spoken to her in 3 weeks because she kept criticizing our venue choice." "Exactly. And guess what Patricia Johnson does for a living? She sells million-dollar homes. Homes with gorgeous backyards. Homes with wealthy owners who might be out of town this weekend." Hannah pulled up another document, a list of luxury properties her mother had access to, complete with photos and property details. "I swallowed my pride and called her an hour ago. Told her everything that happened with Margaret. And you know what she said?" Marcus waited, knowing Hannah was building to something dramatic. "She said, 'Hannah Marie Johnson, no rich brat is going to steal my daughter's wedding day. Give me 2 hours. Hannah clicked to her email, showing a message that had arrived 20 minutes ago. "The Hendersons, Richard and Beverly Henderson, owners of a 12,000-square-foot estate in the West Hills. They're in Europe for 3 weeks, and they've given us permission to use their property for Saturday night,
Full access to the house, the gardens, the outdoor kitchen, everything.
Marcus stared at the photos his mother-in-law had attached. The Henderson estate was breathtaking. Sprawling gardens with mature trees, a stone patio that could easily accommodate their 80 guests, and a backdrop of the Portland city lights that was more romantic than anything Riverside Gardens could have offered. "Hannah, this is incredible, but how are we going to coordinate all the vendors, setup, decorations?" "Already handled," Hannah interrupted, pulling up another tab. "I created a group chat with all our vendors an hour ago. David's bringing extra lighting equipment for outdoor photography. Rose's team can work out of the Hendersons' outdoor kitchen. Jennifer's flowers will actually look better in a garden setting than they would have in Margaret's warehouse." She showed him the group chat, where vendors were already problem-solving and offering additional services. David had volunteered to arrive early for setup photos. Rose's team was excited about the challenge of outdoor catering. Jennifer was practically giddy about the possibility of incorporating the Hendersons' existing landscaping into her arrangements. "But what about tables, chairs, linens, music equipment?" Marcus asked. Hannah grinned and pulled up a rental company website. Powell Party Rentals. They had a cancellation for this weekend. Want to guess where? Marcus's eyes widened. Margaret canceled another couple? Bingo! The Martinez family. Their daughter's quinceañera was supposed to be at Riverside Gardens on Friday night. Margaret canceled them yesterday for the same family emergency. Powell Party Rentals is furious because Margaret's last-minute cancellations have cost them business before. She showed him the email chain with Powell's owner, Steve Richardson. "Steve's giving us the entire Martinez rental package at cost. Tables, chairs, linens, sound system, even a dance floor. He wants to stick it to Margaret as much as we do." Marcus felt his admiration for his fiancée growing with each revelation. "This is amazing, Hannah, but how are we going to coordinate all the vendors, setup, decorations?" "My mom handled the permits through her connections at the city. The Hendersons' homeowners insurance covers events. And the neighbors?" Hannah pulled up a final tab. "Mrs. Chen next door is a widow who loves parties but never gets invited to any. She's volunteering to help with setup in exchange for being included in the celebration." Marcus leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what Hannah had accomplished in just a few hours. "I can't believe you've pulled this together so quickly." "I'm not done yet," Hannah said, her voice taking on that steel edge again. "Saving our wedding is just phase 1. Phase 2 is making sure Margaret pays for what she's done." She opened a new document labeled Public Accountability Campaign. Marcus felt a mix of pride and concern as he read her plans. "Hannah, some of this seems pretty aggressive." "Good," she replied. "Margaret thinks she can prey on couples during their most vulnerable moments. She thinks people will be too stressed and heartbroken to fight back. She's about to learn that she picked the wrong bride to mess with." Hannah had created a multi-pronged strategy that would make any marketing director proud. Social media campaigns highlighting Margaret's pattern of cancellations, a detailed timeline of events for local news outlets, testimonials from other affected couples, even a plan to document their successful backup wedding to show how love triumphs over greed. "The best part," Hannah said, clicking to show him a draft email, "is that I'm going to personally invite Victoria Anderson to our reception." "You're going to what?" "Think about it," Hannah said calmly. "Victoria Anderson is about to celebrate her wedding at a venue that she knows was stolen from another couple. She's either complicit in the betrayal or completely clueless about what her family did. Either way, she deserves to know the truth." She showed him the email she drafted. "Dear Victoria, congratulations on your upcoming wedding at Riverside Gardens. I hope you'll enjoy the venue that was originally booked for my wedding this Saturday night. Since you'll be celebrating in the space I spent 18 months planning for, I thought you might like to attend our reception instead. We'll be hosting it at the Henderson estate, and unlike your celebration, Every guest will know they're welcome because we actually kept our promises. Best wishes, Hannah Johnson. Hannah, you can't send that. Watch me. She moved her cursor to the send button, then paused and looked at Marcus. Actually, you're right. I'm not going to send it yet. I want to wait until after our wedding is a success. Then Victoria Anderson can see exactly what she helped destroy and what we built from the ashes. Marcus reached over and closed Hannah's laptop gently. I love you, he said simply. I love your passion, your intelligence, your refusal to be defeated. But we need to focus on our wedding first, revenge second. Hannah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. Our love story doesn't get derailed by Margaret Sinclair's greed. It just gets a better venue and a more interesting chapter. She stood up and stretched, finally feeling the exhaustion of the emotional roller coaster. Marcus, are you okay with all this? I know this isn't the wedding we planned. He pulled her into his arms. Hannah, I would marry you in a parking lot if that's what it took. The venue was never what mattered. You are what matters. And watching you turn this betrayal into something even more beautiful, that's just one more reason I know I'm marrying exactly the right person. As they headed to bed, Hannah glanced back at her laptop. Tomorrow would bring vendor coordination, family phone calls, and 1,000 last-minute details. But for the first time since Margaret's devastating call, she felt something other than rage. She felt hope.
Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of October drizzle that makes Portland famous, and Hannah woke up to 17 missed calls. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since 6 a.m., and as she scrolled through the notifications, her heart sank. Margaret had been busy. The first call was from David Chen, their photographer. Hannah's hands shook as she listened to his voicemail. Hannah, I'm so sorry, but I have to withdraw from your wedding. Margaret Sinclair called me this morning with concerns about professional liability issues if I work an unsanctioned event. She mentioned something about insurance complications and potential legal problems. I can't risk my business. I'll refund your deposit immediately. The second message was from Rosa Martinez, their caterer. Miss Johnson, I received a very disturbing call this morning about Saturday's event. There seemed to be some legal questions about the venue change, and I've been advised that catering an unpermitted event could jeopardize my food service license. I'm so sorry, but I cannot take this risk with my family's business. Hannah sat on the edge of her bed listening to message after message. Jennifer Walsh, the florist, the musicians Marcus had hired for ceremony music, even Powell Party Rentals. Steve Richardson's voice sounded defeated as he explained that Margaret had somehow discovered their arrangement and threatened to report him to the Better Business Bureau for interfering with contracted services. By the time Hannah reached the kitchen where Marcus was making coffee with grim determination, she had heard the same story 7 times. Margaret Sinclair was systematically destroying their backup plan. She's good, Hannah said, accepting the coffee mug with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I'll give her that. She identified every vendor in our group chat and targeted them with exactly the right pressure points. Marcus's jaw was tight with fury. How is this legal? She can't just intimidate vendors to abandon their clients. She's not technically doing anything illegal, Hannah replied, pulling up the contracts on her phone. Most vendor agreements have force majeure clauses that allow them to withdraw for unforeseen circumstances or insurmountable obstacles. Margaret's playing on their fears about liability and licensing. Hannah's phone rang again. This time it was her mother. Hannah, sweetheart, I have some bad news about the Henderson property. Hannah closed her eyes. Let me guess, Margaret found a way to sabotage that too. Richard Henderson called me 20 minutes ago. Apparently, Margaret Sinclair contacted his homeowners association, claiming that unlicensed events violate neighborhood covenants. She's threatening to file complaints with the city if they allow the wedding to proceed. But you said the permits were handled. They were, but the HOA has their own rules that supersede city permits. Margaret knows exactly which bureaucratic pressure points to hit. Hannah felt the walls closing in around her. Margaret wasn't just defending her stolen booking. She was actively sabotaging Hannah's alternatives. This had escalated from business betrayal to personal warfare. Mom, what are we going to do? Patricia Johnson's voice turned steely.
We're going to fight back, baby girl. But first, I need you to understand exactly who we're dealing with. An hour later, Hannah and Marcus sat in Patricia's real estate office in the Pearl District, surrounded by printouts and documents that painted a disturbing picture of Margaret Sinclair's business practices. I made some calls this morning, Patricia explained, spreading papers across her conference table. Margaret's operation is more sophisticated than you realized. She's not just a desperate business owner making bad decisions, she's running a systematic scam. She showed them bank records she'd obtained through her network of real estate contacts. Riverside Gardens has been financially stable for the past 3 years. Margaret's sob story about pandemic struggles? Complete fiction. She's actually been quite profitable, specifically because of these last-minute venue swaps. How is that possible? Marcus asked. Simple economics, Patricia replied. Margaret books Merrings at her standard rate, let's say $25,000. Then, a few weeks before the event, she approaches wealthier clients who need last-minute venues and charges them premium rates, $50,000 to $75,000. She refunds the original couple's deposit, keeps their additional vendor payments as cancellation fees, and pockets the difference from the new booking. Hannah stared at the financial documents. So our $25,000 wedding became a $75,000 payday when she sold it to Victoria Anderson. Exactly. And because she provides refunds and compensation for damages, most couples don't pursue legal action. They're too relieved to get some money back and too stressed to investigate further. Patricia pulled out another set of documents. But here's where it gets interesting. I contacted some of the other couples who were canceled. The Washingtons, the Martinez family, 2 others from last year. They're all willing to testify about Margaret's pattern of behavior. Testify where? Hannah asked.
Small claims court, initially. But Hannah, if we can prove systematic fraud, this becomes a criminal matter. Margaret could face charges for consumer fraud, breach of contract, and potentially racketeering if we can show ongoing conspiracy. Marcus leaned forward. What about our wedding? We have 36 hours. Patricia smiled. That's where things get interesting. I may not be able to get you the Henderson estate, but I know someone who definitely won't be intimidated by Margaret Sinclair. She pulled out her phone and showed them a contact. Uncle Frank, Johnson Family Farm. Your brother, Frank? Hannah asked. Mom, he lives in McMinnville. That's an hour outside Portland. 45 minutes, Patricia corrected, and Frank Johnson has been hosting events on his farm for 20 years without anyone's permission. 200 acres of apple orchards, a restored barn that holds 150 people, and a man who would love nothing more than to stick it to some city con artist who thinks she can bully his niece. Hannah felt a spark of hope for the first time in hours. Uncle Frank was her father's older brother, a veteran who had turned his family's apple farm into a rustic wedding venue that operated entirely outside conventional business channels. Frank didn't advertise, didn't have contracts, and definitely didn't worry about homeowner association complaints. But what about vendors? Margaret scared off everyone we hired. Patricia grinned. Frank comes with his own network. Local vendors who work exclusively with farm venues, people who have never heard of Margaret Sinclair and wouldn't care if they had. Plus, I've been making calls all morning. She pulled out a list of names and phone numbers. Alternative photographers who specialize in rustic outdoor weddings, caterers who work farmers markets and know how to cook over open flames, musicians who play barn dances and apple festivals. Mom, this sounds completely different from what we planned. It is completely different. It's better. Margaret thinks she's ruined your wedding by forcing you into some underground network of blacklisted vendors. What she's actually done is connected you with people who care more about love than liability, who value relationships over contracts. Hannah looked at the list of vendors. Names she'd never heard of, people who operated outside the polished wedding industry she'd navigated for 18 months. It felt scary and exciting at the same time. There's one more thing, Patricia said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. I called Victoria Anderson. Hannah and Marcus both stared at her. You did what? I called the bride who stole your venue, had a very interesting conversation with Miss Victoria Anderson. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed them notes from the call. Turns out, Victoria had no idea about Margaret's cancellation scam. She thought Riverside Gardens had a legitimate opening when her father approached them about the venue. What did she say when you told her the truth? Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. She was horrified, absolutely mortified. Apparently, Victoria Anderson fancies herself a social justice warrior, graduated from Reed College with a degree in ethics and social policy.
The idea that her wedding was built on someone else's heartbreak made her physically sick. So she's going to cancel? Marcus asked. Hopefully? Better, Patricia replied. She's going to attend your wedding instead, with her entire wedding party, as guests, not as the bride. She wants to publicly apologize and use her family's connections to make sure Margaret faces consequences for fraud. Hannah felt her world spinning. Wait, Victoria Anderson is coming to our wedding? Along with her fiancé, her maid of honor, and about 20 members of her wedding party, she's also convinced her father to provide legal representation for the fraud case against Margaret. Apparently, Richard Anderson doesn't appreciate being used as an unknowing accomplice to a con game. Hannah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. In less than 36 hours, she would be married, not in the elegant warehouse she'd dreamed of, but in an apple orchard surrounded by people she'd never met. Not with the polished vendors she'd carefully selected, but with folk artists and farm caterers who worked by handshake agreements. Hannah, Marcus's voice was gentle. What are you thinking? She turned back to face them, and for the first time since Margaret's devastating call, she was smiling a real smile. I'm thinking Margaret Sinclair just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought she could isolate us, scare away our support system, force us to give up. Hannah looked at the mother's list of alternative vendors, at the photos of Uncle Frank's farm, at the notes about Victoria Anderson's change of heart. Instead, she's connected us with people who actually understand what love looks like. She's turned our wedding into something bigger than just a party. It's become a statement about integrity versus greed, community versus commerce. Patricia nodded approvingly. So, we're doing this? Farm wedding, underground vendors, and a public showdown with Margaret Sinclair? Hannah reached for Marcus's hand. We're doing this, but we're not just saving our wedding anymore. We're making sure Margaret never ruins another couple's life. As they left Patricia's office, Hannah felt something she hadn't expected. Gratitude. Margaret's betrayal had stripped away everything polished and conventional about their wedding plans. What remained was something far more authentic. A celebration built on genuine relationships, defended by people who cared more about justice than profit. The rising challenge had forced them to discover allies they never knew they had.
Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Hannah was standing in Uncle Frank's apple orchard, coordinating setup logistics with their new team of vendors, when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Portland number. Hannah Johnson? This is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Detective Martinez? How can I help you? Miss Johnson, we've received multiple complaints about Riverside Gardens and Margaret Sinclair's business practices. Your mother, Patricia Johnson, filed a formal report yesterday, and we've since been contacted by several other affected couples. We'd like to speak with you about your experiences. Hannah stepped away from the organized chaos of wedding preparation, where Uncle Frank was directing a crew of local farmhands in stringing lights between apple trees. Of course, Detective. What do you need to know? We're investigating possible criminal fraud charges against Miss Sinclair. Based on our preliminary review, this appears to be a systematic pattern of consumer fraud that could result in felony charges. But we need victims willing to provide testimony and evidence. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Detective Martinez? How can I help you? Miss Johnson, we've received multiple complaints about Riverside Gardens and Margaret Sinclair's business practices. Your mother, Patricia Johnson, filed a formal report yesterday, and we've since been contacted by several other affected couples. We'd like to speak with you about your experiences. Hannah stepped away from the organized chaos of wedding preparation, where Uncle Frank was directing a crew of local farmhands in stringing lights between apple trees. Of course, Detective. What do you need to know? We're investigating possible criminal fraud charges against Miss Sinclair. Based on our preliminary review, this appears to be a systematic pattern of consumer fraud that could result in felony charges. But we need victims willing to provide testimony and evidence. Hannah felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. Criminal charges? I thought this was just a civil matter. Breach of contract, maybe small claims court? Miss Johnson, when someone systematically defrauds consumers out of money using false pretenses, it becomes a criminal matter.
We've identified at least 12 instances over the past 3 years where Miss Sinclair has used the same modus operandi. The total value of damages exceeds $200,000. Detective Martinez explained that Patricia's complaint had triggered an investigation that revealed the scope of Margaret's operation. The police had accessed Margaret's business records through a warrant and discovered a sophisticated scheme that went far beyond simple venue double booking. Miss Sinclair has been targeting specific demographics, young couples with limited budgets who wouldn't have the resources to fight lengthy legal battles. She researches their financial backgrounds, their families, their social media presence. She specifically chooses victims who she believes will be too overwhelmed to pursue justice. Hannah sank onto a wooden bench Uncle Frank had placed under an ancient apple tree. She profiled us extensively. We found files on her computer with detailed information about you and Mr. Thompson. Your employment history, your student loan balances, your parents' financial situations. She knew exactly how much money you had available and how much stress the cancellation would cause. The revelation hit Hannah like a physical blow. Margaret's warm, personal approach during their planning meetings, the way she'd asked about their jobs, their families, their dreams, hadn't been genuine interest. It had been intelligence gathering for her fraud operation. Detective, what happens next? We're executing a search warrant at Riverside Gardens tomorrow morning. We expect to arrest Miss Sinclair on charges of consumer fraud, racketeering, and possibly identity theft. But Miss Johnson, we'd like your permission to do something that might benefit your situation. Hannah's pulse quickened. What do you mean? We'd like to coordinate the arrest with your wedding celebration. With your permission, we'd like to serve the warrant while Miss Sinclair is hosting the Anderson wedding at your original venue. Hannah's mind raced. The idea of Margaret being arrested during Victoria Anderson's wedding felt like poetic justice, but also potentially cruel to Victoria, who was now trying to make amends for her unwitting participation in the fraud. Detective, Victoria Anderson and her wedding party are actually going to be at our wedding tomorrow. She's trying to make things right. Even better, Detective Martinez replied. Miss Anderson has already agreed to cooperate with our investigation. Her father's legal team has provided evidence of Miss Sinclair's fraudulent representations about the venue availability. Having the victims and the unwitting accomplices celebrating together while the perpetrator faces justice, that sends a powerful message about community accountability. Hannah looked across the orchard where Marcus was helping Uncle Frank's crew set up a rustic wooden altar between two towering apple trees. The alternate wedding they'd been forced to create was already more beautiful and meaningful than anything Margaret could have provided. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your documentation, and your permission to coordinate the timing. We want to ensure that justice is served in a way that validates what you've been through, not disrupts your celebration. An hour later, Hannah stood in Uncle Frank's farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by her wedding party and the most unlikely coalition of allies she could have ever imagined. Victoria Anderson sat at the wooden table next to Marcus's sister, helping assemble centerpieces made from apples and wildflowers. Richard Anderson was on his phone with his legal team, coordinating evidence for the criminal case. Uncle Frank was teaching Victoria's fiancé, James Mitchell, how to operate the farm's outdoor sound system. I still can't believe this is happening, Victoria said, carefully wiring a stem into place. 2 days ago, I thought I was having a dream wedding. Now I'm an accessory to fraud, and my wedding venue is about to become a crime scene. Hannah studied Victoria Anderson carefully. She was nothing like Hannah had imagined. Instead of the entitled socialite she'd expected, Victoria was thoughtful, articulate, and genuinely horrified by her role in Margaret's scheme.
Victoria, can I ask you something? How did your father even find Margaret? Riverside Gardens isn't exactly in your family's usual social circle. Victoria's expression darkened.
That's the part that really bothers me. Margaret approached us. She somehow knew that James was being deployed and that we needed a last-minute venue. She presented herself as someone doing a favor for a military family. James, Victoria's fiancé, looked up from the sound system. She had researched my deployment schedule, my unit, even my family's military history. She knew exactly what to say to make us feel like she was patriotically supporting our service. She targeted you, just like she targeted us, Hannah realized. You weren't the villains. You were another type of victim. She used your desperation and your values against you. Richard Anderson ended his phone call and joined the conversation. The detective was right about Margaret's profiling operation. My legal team found evidence that she'd been monitoring social media, cross-referencing real estate records, even accessing credit reports through questionable means. She knew which couples could afford to outbid existing bookings and which couples wouldn't fight back when canceled. Uncle Frank entered the kitchen carrying a bottle of his homemade apple wine. "Sounds to me like this Margaret woman picked the wrong family to mess with," he said, pouring glasses for everyone. "Hannah, your grandmother always said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing. Sounds like this fraud artist just introduced you to your real community." Hannah looked around the kitchen at the diverse group of people who had rallied to support her wedding, her uncle, her future in-laws, the couple who had unknowingly stolen her venue, a detective seeking justice, vendors who worked on handshake agreements, and friends who had driven from across the country to celebrate love. "Uncle Frank's right," she said, raising her glass. "Margaret thought she could isolate us, make us feel powerless and alone. Instead, she's shown us exactly who we can count on when everything falls apart." Victoria raised her glass as well. "To Hannah and Marcus, for showing us what integrity looks like when everything goes wrong." "To justice," added Richard Anderson. "To family," said Marcus, looking around the room at the unexpected community that had formed around their crisis. As they drank Uncle Frank's apple wine, Hannah's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. "Search warrant approved. Arrest scheduled for tomorrow at 6 p.m. during the Anderson reception at Riverside Gardens. Media has been notified. Your story is going to help a lot of other couples." Hannah showed the text to the group. A cheer went up from the assembled wedding party, but Victoria looked conflicted. "What's wrong?" Hannah asked. "I just keep thinking about all the couples Margaret has hurt over the years. People who didn't have the resources to fight back, who just accepted the cancellation and tried to move on. How many weddings has she ruined?" Marcus put his arm around Hannah. "That's exactly why this matters. Tomorrow isn't just about our wedding. It's about making sure Margaret can't hurt anyone else." Hannah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility alongside the excitement of her approaching wedding. Detective Martinez said our case could help other victims come forward. If Margaret faces real consequences, maybe other wedding venue owners will think twice before trying similar schemes. As the evening wore on, the group worked together to put finishing touches on the wedding preparations. Victoria's artistic background proved invaluable in arranging the apple and wildflower centerpieces. Richard's business connections had helped secure additional lighting and sound equipment. James's military precision complemented Uncle Frank's agricultural practicality in organizing the logistics. By 10 p.m., the orchard was transformed. String lights created a canopy of stars above the makeshift dance floor. The altar, framed by apple trees heavy with fruit, looked like something from a fairy tale. Tables covered in vintage quilts, provided by Uncle Frank's neighbors, created intimate seating areas throughout the orchard. "It's perfect," Victoria said softly, looking at the magical scene they'd created together. "It's so much more beautiful than anything Riverside Gardens could have offered." Hannah stood next to her, marveling at the unexpected beauty of their crisis-born celebration. "Margaret thought she was taking something away from us. She had no idea she was giving us something better." "What happens tomorrow, after the arrest?" James asked. Hannah smiled, feeling more confident than she had since Margaret's devastating phone call. "Tomorrow, we prove that love wins over greed, that community defeats corruption, and that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the best breakthrough." As the group prepared to leave, Uncle Frank pulled Hannah aside. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he said quietly. "She always said you had steel in your spine. Tomorrow, you're going to show the world exactly what the Johnson family is made of." Hannah hugged her uncle, feeling the strength of generations of strong women flowing through her. Margaret Sinclair had made a fatal error in targeting her family. Tomorrow, the whole world would see the consequences of that mistake.
Friday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that makes Oregon famous.
Hannah woke up in Uncle Frank's guest bedroom to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. But this time, instead of vendors canceling or Margaret's attempts at sabotage, the calls were from journalists, bloggers, and news outlets who had gotten wind of the story. Hannah, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 8 News. We understand you're getting married tomorrow while the woman who canceled your original venue is being arrested for fraud. Would you be available for an interview? The call was followed by similar requests from the Oregonian, Portland Monthly, and 3 different wedding blogs. Somehow, word had spread about their situation, and the media was treating it as a David versus Goliath story that perfectly captured the current cultural moment. "Marcus," Hannah called to her fiancé, who was helping Uncle Frank with morning chores in the barn, "I think our wedding just became a public event." By 9 a.m., Hannah's phone had received 47 interview requests. The story had caught fire on social media after Victoria Anderson posted a detailed Instagram story explaining her family's unwitting role in Margaret's fraud and their decision to attend Hannah's wedding instead of their own reception. Victoria's post, which included photos of the apple orchard transformation and screenshots of Detective Martinez's criminal investigation update, had been shared over 10,000 times. The hashtag Justice for Hannah was trending locally, and wedding industry professionals across the Pacific Northwest were sharing their own stories about Margaret's questionable business practices. "This is incredible," said Sarah Kim, a Portland-based wedding photographer who'd driven out to the farm that morning. "I've been trying to warn couples about Margaret Sinclair for 2 years, but no one wanted to risk legal action. Your story is giving other victims the courage to speak up." Sarah had arrived with a portfolio of evidence: emails from Margaret attempting to poach her clients, screenshots of suspicious venue double bookings, and testimonials from other photographers who'd been blacklisted for refusing to participate in Margaret's schemes. "How many other vendors has she intimidated?" Hannah asked, flipping through Sarah's documentation. "More than you'd think. Margaret's been building herself a network of complicit vendors who get referrals in exchange for staying quiet about her practices. Caterers who won't work with couples she's canceled, photographers who delete images if clients ask too many questions, florists who suddenly become unavailable if Margaret flags them." Uncle Frank joined their conversation, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of a man whose farm was about to host the most meaningful wedding of his career. "Sounds like this Margaret woman built herself a little criminal empire. Good thing she picked on the wrong niece." Hannah's phone rang again. This time it was Detective Martinez with an update that sent chills down her spine. "Miss Johnson, we executed the search warrant at Riverside Gardens this morning. What we found exceeds even our worst-case scenario." "What do you mean?" "Margaret Sinclair has been operating multiple fraudulent schemes simultaneously. The venue cancellations were just part of a larger operation. We found evidence of insurance fraud, tax evasion, vendor kickback schemes, and identity theft. She's been using canceled couples' personal information to access credit reports and financial records." Hannah sank into one of Uncle Frank's porch chairs. "She stole our identities?" "We found files on 63 couples containing social security numbers, bank account information, credit scores, and detailed financial profiles. She's been selling this information to predatory lenders and using it to target couples for various scams." The scope of Margaret's criminal enterprise was staggering. She hadn't just been stealing wedding venues, she'd been harvesting couples' most vulnerable moments to build a comprehensive fraud operation. "Detective, how many victims are we talking about?" "Based on our initial review, at least 200 couples over the past 5 years. The total financial damage appears to exceed $2 million. Ms. Johnson, your decision to fight back has uncovered one of the largest consumer fraud rings in Oregon history." Hannah felt dizzy. What had started as outrage over her canceled wedding had exposed a criminal enterprise that had been devastating couples throughout the Pacific Northwest for years. "There's more," Detective Martinez continued. "We've been contacted by authorities in California, Washington, and Idaho. Margaret has been operating similar schemes in multiple states. This could become a federal case." After hanging up, Hannah sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. Marcus found her on the porch an hour later, still staring at her phone in disbelief. "Hannah? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She showed him her notes from the detective's call. "Marcus, We didn't just catch a dishonest venue owner, we caught the head of a multi-state criminal organization. He read through her notes, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. Hannah, this is bigger than our wedding. This is going to change everything for hundreds of couples. I know, she said quietly, and I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that our wedding is going to become a media circus. Scared that we'll be known as the couple from that fraud case instead of just Hannah and Marcus. Scared that our love story is going to get lost in all this justice and revenge. Marcus sat beside her on the porch swing Uncle Frank had built decades ago. Hannah, do you remember why you fell in love with me? She looked at him, confused by the seemingly random question. Because you're kind, because you make me laugh, because you see the best in people even when they disappoint you.
And do you remember why I fell in love with you? Because I'm organized? Because I plan good vacations? Marcus laughed. Because you're brave. Because when something is wrong, you can't let it go until you fix it. Because you care more about doing what's right than doing what's easy. He gestured toward the orchard, where their wedding team was making final preparations. This whole situation, the investigation, the media attention, the other victims coming forward, this is exactly who you are, Hannah. You're not the couple from the fraud case. You're the woman who turned a personal betrayal into justice for hundreds of people. Hannah felt tears in her eyes. But what if tomorrow becomes about Margaret instead of about us? It won't, said a voice behind them. They turned to see Victoria Anderson approaching with a large coffee thermos and a determined expression. Hannah, I've been thinking about this all night. Tomorrow's ceremony needs to be about your love story, not Margaret's crimes. That's why James and I have a proposal. Victoria sat across from them, her eyes bright with excitement. What if we used Margaret's arrest as the catalyst for something bigger? Not just justice for past victims, but protection for future couples. She pulled out her phone, showing them a web page she'd been designing. The Hannah Johnson Foundation for Wedding Consumer Protection, a nonprofit organization that provides legal support for couples who've been defrauded by venues and vendors. Hannah stared at the mock-up website. Victoria, this is incredible, but your story has already inspired dozens of couples to come forward about their own experiences. Richard's law firm is willing to provide pro bono legal services. James's military connections want to help protect service members from predatory wedding vendors. Uncle Frank's farm could host an annual fundraising event. Marcus leaned forward, studying the proposal. You want to turn our wedding into the launch of a consumer protection foundation? I want to turn your love story into a legacy, she corrected. Margaret Sinclair thought she could steal your wedding day. Instead, she's given you the platform to protect thousands of future couples from experiencing what you went through. Uncle Frank, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped onto the porch. Sounds to me like this foundation idea gives tomorrow's celebration a purpose that goes way beyond just one wedding. Hannah, you and Marcus would be creating something that lasts longer than any party. Hannah looked around at the faces of people who had become family over the past 3 days. Victoria, who had transformed from unwitting accomplice to passionate advocate. Detective Martinez, who had seen their story as the key to unlocking years of criminal activity. Uncle Frank, who had opened his farm and his heart to strangers. Marcus, who had supported every decision she'd made, even when those decisions led them far from their original plans. There's something else, Victoria added, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. Channel 8 wants to broadcast your ceremony live, not as a spectacle, but as a celebration of love triumphing over fraud. They're calling it the wedding that saved Oregon couples. Hannah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what their personal crisis had become. A live broadcast? Victoria, we just wanted a simple wedding with our families. And you'll have that, Marcus said firmly. But you'll also have the chance to make sure no other couple goes through what we went through. Hannah, remember what you said 3 days ago? You wanted to make sure Margaret never ruins another couple's wedding day.
Hannah nodded, remembering the fury that had driven her through the first night of planning their alternative celebration. This foundation, the media coverage, the criminal investigation, this is how we make sure that happens. Not just for Margaret, but for every dishonest vendor who thinks they can prey on couples during their most vulnerable moments. Victoria showed them more details of her foundation proposal. We already have commitments from 15 wedding industry professionals who want to serve on an ethics board. The state attorney general's office wants to work with us to strengthen consumer protection laws. And Hannah, over 200 couples have already reached out asking how they can support the foundation. Hannah stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the apple orchard where she would be married in less than 24 hours. The space was more beautiful than anything she had originally planned, and the community that had formed around their crisis was more meaningful than any guest list she could have created. "Marcus," she said finally, "what do you think? Are you ready to start our marriage by launching a crusade for wedding justice?" Marcus joined her at the porch railing. "Hannah, I'm ready to start our marriage however you want to start it, but I think Victoria's right. Our love story is stronger because of what we've been through, not in spite of it." Hannah turned back to Victoria and Uncle Frank. "Let's do it. Let's turn our wedding into the launch of something that protects other couples. But I have one condition." "What's that?" Victoria asked. Hannah smiled, feeling the same determination that had carried her through the past 3 days. "At some point during the ceremony, we take a moment to acknowledge every couple who's been hurt by wedding fraud. Tomorrow isn't just about justice for us. It's about healing for everyone Margaret has harmed." Victoria stood up and extended her hand. "Deal. The Hannah Johnson Foundation officially launches tomorrow at your wedding." As she shook hands, Hannah realized that Margaret Sinclair's betrayal had accomplished something the venue owner could never have intended. It had transformed a simple love story into a movement, a wedding into a catalyst for change, and a personal crisis into a public service. Tomorrow would be more than just Hannah and Marcus's wedding day. It would be the beginning of something much larger than either of them had ever imagined possible.
Saturday morning arrived with unexpected chaos. Hannah woke up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of vehicles pulling into Uncle Frank's driveway. Through her bedroom window, she could see news vans, catering trucks, and a caravan of cars carrying early arriving guests who had driven through the night to witness what social media was calling the wedding that broke the internet. But at 6 a.m., Hannah's phone rang with a call that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. "Hannah, this is Richard Anderson. We have a serious problem." Hannah's stomach dropped. "What's wrong, Mr. Anderson?" "Margaret Sinclair didn't wait for tonight's arrest. She's fled. Detective Martinez called me 20 minutes ago. Margaret's gone, and she's taken everything with her." Hannah sat up in bed, her mind racing. "What do you mean, everything?" "The deposits from all her pending bookings, client files with personal information, even the contents of her business bank accounts. The police estimate she's stolen over $300,000 in the past 24 hours. Hannah felt the walls closing in around her. "Where is she now?" "Unknown. But Hannah, there's more. Margaret left something behind, a video message that she posted to Riverside Gardens' social media accounts at midnight. You need to see this." Richard texted her a link to Margaret's Facebook page. Hannah clicked on the video with trembling fingers, and Margaret Sinclair's face filled her phone screen. She was sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly into the camera with cold, calculating eyes. "Hello, Portland. My name is Margaret Sinclair, and I want to set the record straight about the lies being spread about my business by Hannah Johnson and her family." Hannah's blood ran cold as Margaret continued her carefully scripted message. "For the past week, I've been harassed, threatened, and falsely accused by a vindictive young woman who refuses to accept that sometimes business arrangements change. Hannah Johnson has orchestrated a malicious campaign to destroy my reputation because she didn't get her way." The video showed Margaret displaying what appeared to be threatening messages and angry voicemails, though Hannah couldn't verify their authenticity.
I've been forced to temporarily close my business and leave the state due to credible threats against my safety. Hannah Johnson's social media mob has targeted not just me, but my employees, my family, and even my elderly mother. This has gone far beyond a simple contract dispute. Hannah watched in horror as Margaret painted herself as the victim of cyberbullying and harassment. The video was professionally edited and emotionally manipulative, designed to completely flip the narrative. I want the public to know that I offered multiple compromises to Miss Johnson, including alternative venues, full refunds, and additional compensation. Every offer was rejected in favor of this public humiliation campaign. I fear for my safety and the safety of my family. The video ended with Margaret's contact information for a quote-unquote legal defense fund and a plea for people to see through the lies and support a small business owner being destroyed by social media vigilantes. Hannah stared at her phone in disbelief. In less than 5 minutes, Margaret had rewritten the entire story, transforming herself from criminal perpetrator to innocent victim. Worse, the video was gaining traction. It already had over 500 shares and hundreds of supportive comments. "She's good," Hannah said aloud, grudgingly admiring Margaret's strategic brilliance even as it threatened to destroy everything they'd worked for. Marcus knocked on her door. "Hannah? Richard Anderson is here with Detective Martinez. They say it's urgent." Hannah threw on clothes and rushed downstairs to find Uncle Frank's kitchen filled with grim faces. Detective Martinez looked exhausted, and Richard Anderson was pacing angrily while talking rapidly into his phone. "Hannah," Detective Martinez said without preamble, "Margaret Sinclair has turned this into a public relations war. Her video is being picked up by news outlets as a story about social media harassment gone too far." Uncle Frank poured Hannah a cup of coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "The local news is already running with her version, says there's 2 sides to every story, and questioning whether you've been fair to this poor businesswoman." Hannah felt sick. What about the criminal evidence, the fraud investigation, the other victims? All of that takes time to prove in court. Margaret's video is designed to create reasonable doubt in the public mind before we can present our case. She's betting that if she can discredit you personally, people will question everything else. Richard Anderson ended his phone call and joined the conversation. It gets worse. Margaret's legal team, and yes, she apparently has one, is threatening to sue you, your family, and anyone associated with today's wedding for defamation, harassment, and intentional interference with business relations. "Can she do that?" Marcus asked.
"She can file the lawsuits whether she has a case or not," Richard replied. "The goal isn't to win, it's to intimidate you into backing down and to create enough legal uncertainty that the media starts treating this as a he said, she said situation." Hannah stared out Uncle Frank's kitchen window at the wedding setup that was already underway in the orchard. Vendors were arranging chairs, hanging final decorations, and preparing for what was supposed to be the most important day of her life. Now it felt like she was walking into a trap. "What are our options?" Hannah asked quietly. Detective Martinez consulted her notes. "Legally, we can continue the investigation regardless of Margaret's disappearance. The evidence speaks for itself. But practically, she's made this much more complicated." "The foundation launch is also at risk," Victoria Anderson added, entering the kitchen with James and looking deeply worried. 3 of our potential board members have already withdrawn, citing concerns about being associated with a controversial situation. Hannah felt everything slipping away. Margaret had managed to turn Hannah's moment of triumph into a public relations disaster. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate justice and community was becoming a liability for everyone involved. "Maybe we should postpone," Marcus said quietly. "Wait until the legal situation settles, until Margaret is caught, until we can prove our side of the story." "No." The word came out harder than Hannah intended. She stood up, feeling something crystallize inside her chest. "That's exactly what Margaret wants. She's counting on us being too scared, too overwhelmed, too worried about public opinion to follow through." Uncle Frank nodded approvingly. "That's my girl. Your grandmother always said you had backbone."
But Hannah, Victoria said gently, the media coverage, the legal threats, the doubt she's cast, this could follow you forever. Maybe it's better to... To what? Hannah interrupted. To let Margaret win? To let her disappear with hundreds of thousands of dollars while her victims stay silent? To abandon the foundation before we even start? Hannah looked around the room at the faces of people who had become her family over the past week. Margaret made one crucial mistake in that video. She assumed I was fighting for my wedding day. She doesn't understand that I'm fighting for something much bigger than that. Hannah pulled out her phone and opened the video recording app. If Margaret wants to make this a public relations war, then let's give her a war, but we're gonna fight with the truth. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Something I should have done from the beginning, Hannah replied, hitting the record button. I'm telling our story. All of it. The fraud, the timeline of events, Detective Martinez's contact information for victims to report their experiences, and documentation of Margaret's systematic fraud pattern. But most importantly, she talked about why this matters beyond just her wedding day. She said into the camera, Margaret Sinclair thinks this is about one couple's disappointment. She's wrong. This is about whether we're going to let con artists prey on couples during the most important moments of their lives. This is about whether we're going to hold people accountable for systematic fraud or let them hide behind victim blaming and legal intimidation. Hannah directly looked into the camera lens. In 4 hours, I'm getting married in my uncle's apple orchard, surrounded by people who believe that love and justice are more important than public relations and profit margins. Margaret Sinclair can threaten all the lawsuits she wants. She can paint herself as the victim and me as the villain, but she can't change the truth. She paused, gathering her thoughts for the closing. To every couple who's been defrauded by a wedding vendor, to every person who's been told to stay quiet and move on, to everyone who's ever wondered if fighting back is worth the risk, this is your answer. Yes, it's worth it. Yes, it's scary. And yes, sometimes the people you're fighting will try to destroy you personally when they can't defend themselves legally. Hannah looked off camera for a moment, seeing Marcus, Uncle Frank, Detective Martinez, and the Anderson family all watching her with expressions of pride and determination. But you know what Margaret Sinclair didn't count on? She didn't count on community. She didn't count on people caring more about justice than convenience. She didn't count on love being stronger than greed. Hannah smiled into the camera. So today we're going to prove her wrong. We're getting married, we're launching the foundation, and we're not backing down. Because some fights are too important to lose, and some stories are too important to silence. When Hannah finished recording, the kitchen was completely quiet. Then Uncle Frank started clapping, followed by everyone else in the room. Margaret Sinclair just learned something, Detective Martinez said with a slight smile. She picked the wrong bride to mess with. As Hannah uploaded her video response, she felt something she hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Complete certainty. Whatever happened today, whatever legal battles lay ahead, whatever public opinion decided about their story, she knew they were doing the right thing. Margaret's ultimate test had backfired. Instead of intimidating Hannah into silence, it had given her the platform to speak louder than ever before. The wedding was still 4 hours away, but Hannah Johnson had already won the most important victory of her life. The decision to choose courage over comfort, justice over convenience, and truth over public relations. Now all that remained was to get married and change the world.
Saturday evening arrived with golden light filtering through the apple trees, and Uncle Frank's orchard had been transformed into something beyond Hannah's wildest dreams. As she stood in the farmhouse, putting on her grandmother's pearl earrings and looking at herself in the antique mirror, Hannah could hear the voices of 120 guests, 40 more than originally planned, gathering in the orchard below. Her response video to Margaret's accusations had gone viral, garnering over 50,000 views in 6 hours and generating an overwhelming wave of support. Couples from across the country had shared their own stories of vendor fraud. Wedding industry professionals had publicly committed to ethical business practices. 3 major news networks had requested live interviews during the reception. But more importantly, Detective Martinez had called with breakthrough news just as Hannah was finishing her makeup.
Hannah, we found her. Margaret Sinclair was arrested 2 hours ago at a hotel in Las Vegas. She made a crucial mistake. She used a credit card linked to one of her victims' stolen identities to pay for her hotel room. The irony was perfect. Margaret's own criminal habits had led to her capture. There's more, Detective Martinez continued. The FBI raided her hotel room and found evidence of an even larger operation. She's been running similar wedding fraud schemes in 12 states. We're looking at federal charges now, possibly 20 to 30 years in prison. As Hannah walked down the aisle created between the apple trees, her arm linked with Uncle Frank's. Her father had graciously agreed that Frank deserved the honor after everything he'd done. She saw faces that told the story of her incredible week. Victoria Anderson sat in the front row next to Marcus's family, wearing a bridesmaid's dress they'd found at a vintage shop that morning. Detective Martinez had come in civilian clothes, sitting with the other couples who had been victims of Margaret's fraud and had driven from across Oregon to witness this moment of triumph. The ceremony itself was conducted by Judge Patricia Hawkins, a family friend of Uncle Frank's who had volunteered to officiate when their original officiant canceled in fear of Margaret's legal threats. Judge Hawkins had a particular reason for wanting to participate. Her own daughter had been scammed by a wedding photographer 5 years earlier, and she'd never forgotten the feeling of helplessness. Hannah and Marcus, Judge Hawkins said as they stood beneath the apple tree altar, your love story has become something larger than yourselves. Today, you're not just committing to each other, you're showing the world what it looks like when love refuses to be defeated by greed. When they exchanged vows, Hannah spoke words she had written just that morning. Marcus, a week ago, I thought I was marrying you in a warehouse surrounded by carefully curated perfection. Instead, I'm marrying you in an orchard surrounded by people who proved that real community forms when we fight for what's right together. You've shown me that true partnership means supporting each other's battles, even when those battles become bigger than we ever imagined. Marcus's vows brought tears to every eye in the orchard. Hannah, watching you turn betrayal into justice, watching you transform heartbreak into hope for hundreds of other couples, I've never been more proud to call myself your partner. You've shown me that love isn't just about the good times. It's about standing together when everything falls apart and building something better from the pieces. When Judge Hawkins pronounced them married, the entire orchard erupted in cheers. But the most meaningful moment came during the reception when Hannah took the microphone for what everyone expected to be a traditional thank you speech. 6 days ago, Margaret Sinclair thought she was stealing our wedding venue. What she actually did was introduce us to our real community, people who care more about justice than convenience, more about protecting others than protecting themselves. Hannah gestured to the crowd, where wedding industry professionals sat next to fraud victims, where Victoria Anderson was dancing with Marcus's grandmother, where Detective Martinez was comparing notes with Richard Anderson about expanding the criminal investigation. Tonight, we're officially launching the Hannah Johnson Foundation for Wedding Consumer Protection. But this foundation isn't about us. It's about making sure no other couple ever has to choose between their dream wedding and their principles. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, but Hannah wasn't finished. I want to share some numbers with you. In the past week, 127 couples have come forward with stories of wedding vendor fraud. The total value of damages exceeds $800,000. Margaret Sinclair wasn't just running a small con game. She was part of a network of predatory vendors who specifically target couples during their most vulnerable moments. Hannah pulled out her phone, showing the latest statistics they had compiled. But here's what gives me hope. 43 wedding industry professionals have signed our ethical vendor pledge. 6 states are introducing legislation to strengthen consumer protection laws for wedding services. And 3 major law firms have committed to providing pro bono services for fraud victims. Victoria Anderson joined Hannah at the microphone, her voice strong and clear. 2 weeks ago, I was unknowingly participating in the theft of someone else's wedding day. Today, I am proud to announce that the Anderson Development Group is providing the initial funding for the Hannah Johnson Foundation, a $500,000 commitment to ensure couples have legal protection and recourse when vendors betray their trust. The announcement sent another wave of excitement through the crowd. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Hawkins returned to the microphone. As someone who has worked in the legal system for 30 years, I want you to know that what Hannah and Marcus have accomplished this week is extraordinary. They didn't just expose one criminal, they've created a movement that will protect thousands of future couples.
Judge Hawkins paused, looking directly at Hannah and Marcus. But more than that, they've shown us what marriage really means. It's not about perfect weddings or flawless vendors or elegant venues. It's about facing crisis together and choosing to build something meaningful from whatever life throws at you. As the evening continued, Hannah found herself circulating among guests who had become family over the course of one impossible week. She spoke with other fraud victims who were finding healing in community action. She met vendors who were committed to raising industry standards. She danced with her new husband while photographers documented not just their wedding, but the launch of a movement. The most satisfying moment came at 9 p.m. when Detective Martinez received a call updating her on Margaret's arrest. She found Hannah and Marcus at their sweetheart table and delivered the news with a broad smile. Margaret Sinclair has been charged with 12 federal counts of fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. The FBI estimates her total criminal operation affected over 400 couples across 12 states. Her conviction is virtually guaranteed, and she's looking at 25 to 30 years in federal prison. Marcus raised his champagne glass. To justice served. To community, Hannah added, looking around at the faces that had become family. To the couples she'll never hurt again, Victoria chimed in. As the evening wound down, Hannah stood with Uncle Frank on his farmhouse porch, looking out at the orchard where guests were still dancing under string lights and stars. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Uncle Frank said quietly. "She always said the Johnson women were fighters, but I don't think even she could have imagined this." Hannah smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced since before Margaret's devastating phone call a week earlier. "Uncle Frank, do you think we did the right thing, making our wedding about more than just us?" Uncle Frank chuckled. "Hannah, girl, you didn't make your wedding about more than just you. You discovered that your love story is bigger than you realized. Most couples promise to love each other through sickness and health, for richer or poorer. You and Marcus proved that your love can survive betrayal and create justice." As guests began to leave, many stopped to sign up as volunteers for the foundation, to share their own stories, or simply to thank Hannah and Marcus for showing them what courage looks like in action. The last guest to leave was Victoria Anderson, who hugged Hannah tightly at the farmhouse door. "Thank you," Victoria said simply, "for showing me what integrity looks like when everything goes wrong, for teaching me that doing the right thing is more important than avoiding conflict, for proving that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing you ever do." After everyone had gone, Hannah and Marcus sat on Uncle Frank's porch swing, still in their wedding clothes, processing the extraordinary day they'd just experienced. "So," Marcus said, pulling his wife closer, "we're married, we've launched a foundation, we've helped send a criminal to prison, and we've started a movement to protect other couples from wedding fraud. What do we do for an encore?" Hannah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "We go on our honeymoon to Ireland like we planned, but first we help 127 couples get justice for what happened to them. We work with legislators to pass stronger consumer protection laws. We make sure the foundation becomes something that outlasts us." Marcus kissed her forehead. "And then? Then we live happily ever after, knowing that our love story helped write better endings for hundreds of other couples." As they sat in comfortable silence, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Margaret Sinclair's betrayal had stripped away everything superficial about their wedding plans, revealing something much more authentic and meaningful underneath. Their love hadn't just survived the crisis,
it had been strengthened by it. The venue theft that was supposed to ruin their wedding had instead connected them with their true community. The vendor intimidation that was supposed to isolate them had introduced them to people who shared their values. The public relations attack that was supposed to silence them had given them a platform to speak for couples who had never found their voice. Margaret Sinclair tried to steal their wedding day, but she had inadvertently given them something far more valuable, a purpose that would last long after the wedding photos faded and the flowers wilted. 6 months later, the Hannah Johnson Foundation had helped recover over $2 million in damages for defrauded couples, had assisted in the prosecution of 17 dishonest vendors, and had successfully lobbied for stronger consumer protection laws in 8 states. Margaret Sinclair was serving a 28-year sentence in federal prison, and Hannah and Marcus Johnson were living proof that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the most beautiful truth, that love really can conquer greed, community really can defeat corruption, and courage really can change the world. Their wedding had lasted 1 evening. Their impact would last forever.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.